There we are. It is 7 o'clock, so we will commence the meeting and welcome everybody. First item, apologies for absence.
We have one apology from Councillor Verdi.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No. So we then move to the minutes of the last meeting. If we just go through them page by page. So it's page 1, 2, 3. I would say that on page 3, we have the question of the cycling paths and the new footbridge, which I believe we're wanting to bring back. So that was an action to come back. Page 4, again, there was an action on there for a briefing note, which we've had late this afternoon. That was the briefing note on communities, facilities and assets. And that was, as I say, has arrived late this afternoon. So I haven't been able to read it, and I don't suppose anybody else has at this stage. Page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Councillor Verdi, I believe, asked a question. It was going to be dealt with at a later date, and I believe that was done. It was a finance question, Sarah, so I think he probably spoke to it. So is everybody in agreement that the minutes are correct? Okay, I will then sign. Thank you, Laura. I'm going to propose that we probably move things around slightly so that we can let Sarah and maybe Ed go, if that's all right with everybody. So if you'll bring the finance and performance forward, and that means we can release you. So if I can find the right pages. Oh, there we go. Right, so Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Q1 Finance and Performance Report, which the first part of which I will go through the key points of the finance section before handing over to Ed to talk through the performance, and then we'll take questions at the end of both of those sections. So the Q1 position for this report continues to highlight the COVID variances separately. And we have no further grant expectations in respect of COVID for the remainder of this year. Also to point out that the budget was set anticipating an adverse impact of COVID, so we took 20% off the income for those areas that we perceive to be affected. The table at 4.2 summarises the position at Q1. It details some lost income and additional costs in relation to COVID of 0.71 million, with in-year efficiency savings of 394,000. These are detailed in Appendix A and B. We also have an expected surplus of 2.338 million in business rates, but of this 1.8 million will need to go into reserves to cover later years' deficits that we anticipate as a result of additional reliefs that have been given for COVID. Paragraph 4.3 details some further commitments from the efficiency savings from this year. 50,000 for a feasibility study and £1,000 to HGV drivers as a market supplement. Appendix A summarises the overall revenue position, and that's 0.88 million. Paragraph 4.5 and Appendix E goes on to discuss the special expenses position. This is also affected by COVID, mostly in relation to higher venues due to the restrictions still in place. Some of this loss is actually covered by the sales fees and charges grant that we are claiming for Q1 only, bringing the net effect to £5,000. Paragraphs 4.6 and 4.7 summarise the capital underspend projected at the moment at 2.837 million. And Appendix C and D provide further details on these schemes. The main variances are registered housing providers at the non-uncommitted balance, and Cotgrave and Keyworth Leisure Centre changing facilities that have slipped. Paragraph 4.8 explains the expected receipts, capital, and the unlikely need to borrow. And this also contributes to the efficiency position with a saving on interest costs. Paragraph 4.9 to 4.16 updates COVID issues that are reported at Q1. These are namely the claim previously referred to for sales fees and charges. As the report was written, it was estimated at 46k, but the work subsequently has been done and submitted at 80k, which is a slight improvement. And as mentioned before, we will only get this for Q1. Table 2 shows the grants received by the council in relation to COVID, and as mentioned, no further grants anticipated at this stage. Multi-asset investments were reported to the group last year as they took a bit of a hit from COVID and reduction in value. These are now back up pleasingly to pre-COVID levels, and actually at Q1 slightly above where we were prior to COVID. Paragraph 4.13 highlights the improved performance on collection of business rates and council tax, but also highlights the sensitivity of these to other external factors such as the change in reliefs issued from COVID. In conclusion, the projected position is stable, but there's still risks and further restrictions potentially over the winter period, and also uncertainty over government funding. But a reserves position, a health reserves position, is vital to ensure that we can be resilient. Still lots of uncertainty with business rates and fairer funding reviews. These are all now likely not to be before 23-24. But also we need to factor in opportunities such as the Freeport and Development Corporation. So the position will need to be closely monitored. Performance is discussed further in the second part of the report.
Good evening, Chairman, Councillors. Moving on to performance, if I can refer to Appendix G that covers many aspects of the performance data. I'll go to the respective scorecards here, starting with the exceptions on the corporate scorecard. The summary table shows there was no exceptions to report for strategic tasks and 4 performance indicators falling below target. The performance of these measures has been impacted by lockdown or changes in resident behaviours as a result of COVID, as much as COVID affected indicators are no longer subject to the special reporting we introduced in 2020-2021. So just on that point, LINS 18, LINS 23 in the first 2 are below target, and they're concerned with the high levels of residual waste affecting recycling figures. This is a pattern repeated across the county, so we're not alone here, but it is obviously one of concern at this moment in time. So looking more at why these are occurring, residents are working from home more, of course, the knock-on effect being more waste is created at home collection. I think we're mindful, of course, of the Health Secretary's words in recent weeks. Any COVID restrictions return nationally, this could be in the form of advice to work from home again, which may not assist the target being met in subsequent quarters, but certainly dealing with the figures we've got in front of us for Q1. The figures are here because the grey bin waste is heavier than the blue bin recycling waste, and as a percentage based on tonnage collected, the overall recycling rate is below the target of pre-pandemic levels. So the performance is slightly up this year, but we're still lower than the target wishes to be. The recycling rate also takes into account the garden waste tonnage and glass collected at our bank sites as well. LNS 23 focuses on that bit, that grey bin waste tonnage again. It's higher due to more people working from home. The hope is, as we begin to enter the sort of the transition to a longer term office based situation, however long away that may be, this will mean that the figures will reduce slightly, but we've obviously got barriers to overcome to get those targets to be met in due course. Moving on then to the focus on the pavilion community hall playing field usage. It is up on this period last year, but has been impacted by the great work at Campston Community Hall, being used as a vaccination centre, Gresham Sports Park being closed for redevelopment, and the transferred management of Luttrell Hall in West Bridgeford in May. So usage of the sales of the sites, of course, is really community led. Some groups are not in the stride of regular bookings yet. We're waiting to see what the winter holds, obviously, and the pandemic, and any subsequent government advice that may help give people more confidence in due course. So we'll review marketing of the sites accordingly as well once the picture becomes clearer as to the usage in the current quarter. Moving on to the usage of community facilities. COVID restrictions, of course, it were extended until July 19th this year. That's had an impact on the percentage of users returning to our community buildings. Some users deferred returning until September. Some groups are working on reduced group sizes. Understandable given the current existing situation of where we're at with the pandemic. And that includes particularly the vulnerable and old groups who have been slower than most to return. Hopefully that will return once their confidence has been restored. Moving on then to just the exceptions on the operational scorecard. We're focusing here first on the number of applications validated in the first quarter for planning applications. A really significant jump, 42%. That's a very large increase compared with last year's figures. The increase in workload is impacting on performance within the team, but we are managing this proactively as an organisation of recruited agency work to deal with the peak in workload. Looking again then at on planning enforcement this time, inspections carried out with a new categorisation, enforcement inquiries and targets in line with the new enforcement policy that was adopted in March. The report's yet to be amended to take these into account, the new targets we're looking at. So this indicator is currently showing as an exception. We're moving over to customer services. The percentage of calls answered in 40 seconds. The current service level agreement for this time frame is set against a quite historical national benchmark and is being reviewed in line with new customer service standards across the organisation. At the right time, this performance indicator will switch to 60 seconds in line with more up-to-date national benchmarking. The background on this, of course, is that when the call centre was first introduced back in 2003, so much has changed. The complexity of what the team deal with has changed, and the adjustment to 60 seconds will take this into account. By way of comparison of some description of the 46% of calls answered in 40 seconds in this quarter we're looking at here, for the month of June within it, 71% were taken within 60 seconds. So I hope that gives a bit more of a clear indication of what can be achieved in line with this more up-to-date national benchmark. Very finally, we're just referencing then on robberies per 1,000 of the population. There were 33 reported during this quarter. It only needs a small number to make an impact, of course. Just obviously, as the context is, we don't set the targets, the police do, and the Police and Crime Commissioner sets these, quite stretching targets to achieve. But as ever, our community safety team are working hand in hand with police and will endeavour to keep putting their campaigns into the mindset of the community so that they're aware of how they can lower potential robberies in their communities. Are there any points anyone wishes to raise?
So good job, Councillor Mansell's here next to me, isn't it? I think pay increase of vice chairman is in order for committees. There we go. So I mean, first of all, the motion about the payment for the refuse workers is one that we obviously have to do. I think in the current market condition, I think again want to place on record thanks to our team because again all they did during the pandemic and what they continue to do. I think I'm sure our team recognise how valued they are working for the council rather than head off to some commercial organisations and see things settle down, be cast off again. They know the great work we do, and I know that Banks and Darryl, that they do speak to the team. So I think this payment is absolutely value we should do, and like I say, it's come up all sport when it comes to the vote. In terms of recycling, just wondering about with the reduction in the tonnage that we're taking in of recycling amounts and increase the great waste, is it worth a refresher campaign for what people can recycle? Because again, I'm sure if you're going to be recycling the amount of stuff going there that they shouldn't do, and then obviously that entire load being contaminated and going, I think again might be that re-education campaign, which the great communication we have go out there, if it's social media and also a physical reminder and green waste. We get a lot, obviously, the amount of new houses we've got in the borough and people moving in, how are we actually aware that they do the green waste scheme, and whether we could again look at something targeted to new people to join the electoral roll potentially. I'm not sure if that can be done, but something around there, so hopefully we can get these people signed up straight away rather than when they might see it at a later date to get that money in. In terms of community facilities, final point I wish to make, I think I see again money's going for the junior companion and West Park between the 3rd and 22, 23. The point I've made it for many years, and I'll keep making until we do that. I think we really need to look at those facilities, because at the minute we've got 2 community facilities which cost council a lot of money, which don't get the use they should do, because quite frankly they pass this out widely, and the money we have into them, they are not going to be up to standards of trying to meet our target on carbon neutrality of those buildings. I think you spend a hell of a lot of money retrofitting, where we should be looking at whether we can build a new facility there for the community that can meet those targets, but also save us money in the long run. Because like I said, both those facilities, remember we were sitting on the review panel 2 years ago now, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when we looked at it, and the usage figures are nowhere near where they should be, and like I say, we just keep throwing that money. So I think we do need to push that back again to letting people to make those decisions about, before we just keep putting 6-figure sums in year after year and just hoping it's going to actually resolve itself, which it won't. Thank you, Jen.
I'm not on, am I? Set up 2 or 3 years ago, and I am just wondering what happened to that work that was done, and if in fact we could have an update on that as to what happened to it. Did it just disappear into the ether? Okay. Councillor Bansal.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to echo a point that Councillor Wheeler made around the recycling, around the education, but just breaking it down as well. I know you mentioned recycling, and you mentioned green waste. Glass, was that mentioned? Yeah. I think the whole kind of education on that, the glass, the cardboard, the plastic, I think that might help just increase it. I know when I go to work, we've got recycling bins there, and it's the same habits I try to bring home. I know sometimes people can get lazy, but I think just having that, I think might. So I just wanted to echo that comment. And the other one was the 40% jump in planning applications, significant, huge. And just want to acknowledge the great work the team's doing as well, trying to stay on top of all of that. I've had a lot of conversations, and they're doing. Just want to say, good job. That's a huge number. Understandable what's going on with everything. So just wanted to make a comment on that. Say thank you to the planning team and how they're handling it and what they're doing.
Thank you.
But I'm not on. They're suffering badly with staff sickness and recruitment issues. So I think, yes, it's amazing that they've been able to cope as well as they have. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just on that particular point, I think we ought to acknowledge, obviously, Mr. Pegram has some health issues, and I think we should send our best wishes to him for a speedy recovery, because obviously as you've just indicated, is under a heck of a lot of pressure anyway. And so, you know, we really hope that he can get back up and running as quickly as possible. But having all those other shortages as well, I know that it is being addressed because you've said it, being proactive. Just be interested to know what has been done in terms of recruitment and agency staff, etc. Is that enough to handle the situation, for want of a better expression, or does it still mean that there's going to be a decline in the reaction to applications, etc. While I've just got the floor as well, just in terms of the recycling, whilst yes, there has been a drop to 50%, that is still by far the best in Nottinghamshire, and in fact is double one of the recycling rates in one of the other districts in Nottinghamshire. So the performance is still very good. And just wanted to answer Councillor Wheeler's question about products or materials to be recycled. I would suggest that it would be a good idea just to hang fire on issuing that information for a few weeks, because I happen to know that the Transport and Environment Committee at the County Council is meeting in 2 weeks to discuss such a thing, and I'm in close contact with the chairman of that committee, who reliably informs me that there's likely to be a few changes. So best to wait a while and give up-to-date information rather than having to say, oh, I know we just told you you can do this and do that, but now it's all changed and blah, blah, blah. So that's a good example to sort of keep in touch and liaise with the county to make sure we've got up-to-date information. I've got some other questions about finances, but I suppose do you want to sort of close that bit off first rather than me fire off? Oh, right. Oh, thought we might have got some responses. But, well, a few questions. In fact, one of the sort of overriding strategic questions, which isn't sort of part of the detail, but I just wondered if somebody can remind me, because I've forgotten, as to why finance and performance is looked at in this group and not in the governance scrutiny group. As I say, I confess I've forgotten why that is. Sarah mentioned in terms of the 2.338 million, and on page 12, paragraph 4.1, and talk about covering the potential deficit, etc. But I just wanted clarification where it talks about as a result of additional COVID-related business rate relief. Is this part of the monies that's recovered from government, or have we got to stand this? Do you want me to fire you questions all at once, or do you want to do them sort of? Oh, right. Okay.
In relation to the refunds back from the release, yes, that does come from government.
Right. Okay. Sorry, just looking for. Oh, page 24. Why have I queried that? Oh yes, planning and growth, the fees and charges, planning income. I just wondered how that compared with other years, you know, given the fact that we've had this sort of topsy-turvy situation in the planning. I just wondered how that compares with other years.
That variance that you're looking at there, the 210, that is actually to bring the income back up to what it would have been had we not reduced the COVID impact. So it's almost back up to its original level. at this stage, it's hard to say whether we will exceed last year's budget, but in general, the budget has been increased year on year. So chances are at the end of this year, it probably will exceed the way things are going at the moment. But we'll know more at the Q2 report, which we're writing at the moment.
Right. Okay. Appendix C, I noticed the borrowing is spot on, whereas practically every other figure they're all at variance. And I just wondered how come we've managed to maintain an exact borrowing according to budget. Well, I would have thought that borrowing would have been even more topsy-turvy, or is that current budget, has that sort of already been set, knowing all these other COVID situations are already in place?
The borrowing figure on this particular element of the capital programme is in relation to internal borrowing. So that would be to fund part of the capital programme, and I expect that wouldn't change unless all other avenues were exhausted or didn't come to fruition. And then at that point, we'd probably have to look to internally borrow more or less. At this point, that's what we plan to do, and that's what we will do unless something changes.
Page 28, I noticed that on sort of refurbishments and so on, and a lot of them are deferred to the next year. Presumably, are these perhaps not as necessary as we thought they were going to be? You know, to refurbish a roof, one would assume that it's probably quite necessary, or are we saying that it wasn't as necessary as we thought it was going to be?
I'm not working in the planning department. I can't property department. I can't comment to say whether that is necessary or not. But what the team have done is looked through, and they make an assessment on which projects they can defer based on the resources that they have. So I can only assume that those works weren't as necessary as maybe some others that have taken priority.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
It's on again, am I? On page 14, paragraph 4.7, you talk about 0.692 million support for registered housing providers, and that officers are working on options for the commitment of this and future sums receivable. By options meaning what?
Oh, no, it's me.
Don't have the details of those potential options to hand, but it'd be things in the past that we've done, are things like converting garages and potentially getting empty properties and things like that. But those options, I can come back to you if you want to know a range of what those options are.
So it just seems a bit vague. Right, anybody else? Any further questions? You
well,
did have a question, didn't you, Richard?
Yes, a reminder as to why the
Yes,
this is here and not
Exactly.
in governance.
and I think perhaps Charlotte can help us with that.
It's probably quite a historical kind of thing. So performance generally used to go under the old scrutiny structure. Performance went to the Performance Management Board, and the finance information went to what became now the Governance Scrutiny Group. When we redid scrutiny, we decided, those people that were involved in that piece of review work, that performance and finance would be a combined report. And because it was a combined report, it would come here so that you had the corporate overview of what was going on. There is nothing to say that we can't change that if we feel that it is better scrutinised somewhere else. But you seem to have an awful lot of questions if you want to get rid of it.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm glad you've reminded me as to why we came to the decision. If that's what we decided, then that's fine. No, I was just querying as to why, if we've got a governance scrutiny, as to why finance came. But I accept and I agree. Yes, corporate overview scrutiny should have an overview of finances. So I accept.
Very well. In that event, I presume everyone's read the recommendations. Is everybody in favour? Very well. Thank you both very much. And that releases you for an early night. Right, having done that, we move on to feedback from Scrutiny Group Chairman and indeed from me. I've got one or two questions for you. There's been a change in the timing of the papers that you received prior to your meetings. Has that been helpful? There we are. So that's a positive. Jonathan, you did have a query about your work programme, but I think you.
Yeah, I think we've got it. We'll cover it.
Okay, fair enough. There have been some problems again with over lengthy presentations. If you could feed this back, surely if a report is accurate and succinct and all the members have read it, then there should be no need to verbally go through it again. Any question should be exactly what scrutiny is. Therefore, officers presenting those reports should just say, "You've read my report, I'm happy to take questions." Councillor Clark, waving at me.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to support those comments in terms of quite often happens that certainly in our scrutiny group that there's quite a lengthy presentation and then I've only got 5 minutes or 10 minutes to discuss the thing and get into a debate about it, which as you just indicated is not necessarily very good scrutiny. So I would have suggested that a presentation is more about sort of highlighting some of the really sort of pertinent things that need emphasising, if you like, but more time should be left to have a good discussion about the particular issue involved.
Well, I would suggest that maybe you as chairman make the point at the beginning of the meeting that presentations are time limited and therefore can we stick to the salient points, give us time for scrutiny. Councillor Weed.
I completely agree with the point. Want to try to make it as efficient as possible. I think we've got to bear in mind is some of the people who present to us are trying to justify why we're getting the funding. So of course they are going to go war and peace to justify what they do for us. I get that. I think we're all within that situation. What I think would be more helpful is, I know it's hard. People like to cram a presentation, like me, a presentation 5 minutes before I do it. I'm still rewriting it, but trying to ask for those presentation advance that we can send out to members to look at questions. A lot of it comes up at the time, or they haven't had a chance to think about it in a bit more detail beforehand, or do it or research because some of it they can't themselves just as it comes up at that meeting. And also saying to our, I think when it's a presentation by internal officer, then absolutely agree, saying, look, 20 minutes to do a briefing note potentially beforehand, which can also be on the agenda for the public to look at. Because again, you've got to bear in mind that we might know, but if there's a member of the public watching, they might not know the background. So that's what I say, so it's balanced. But I think that's what it is, because some of the presentations we've had from some of you, I said beforehand and spoke to self-council plan, some people said, look, make sure you tell them it's only maximum an hour on this item. After that, they're off. I see why they are doing that. So I think that's the balance we try to strike. It's a communication with the especially external providers. We need to have and say, look, we're not going to disregard you. You do a 20-minute presentation, not 45 minutes. It's quality, not quantity.
So if we can take that forward.
Chairman.
Sorry,
yeah,
I can't see you.
No,
I
I discreetly entered 2 minutes late, but I think in relation to this, the length of the presentations, I think that we as committee chairman or members have a role to play in this, because I think if I'm honest, if we self-assess ourselves, what is the better description, there's a bit of a weakness in members asking questions. And I think there needs to be a balance between the length of an officer's presentation, who may have answered every question already that the members may already have. So we get to a point where at the end of the presentation where the poor chairman or chair lady is saying, right, who would like to ask any questions? And you're met with stunned silence. And you feel for the officer who's put a lot of time and effort into producing a report, and they may think, well, perhaps these members aren't interested after all, or could it have been so intense and complicated that the members don't quite understand or don't want to look silly for asking a question that might be perceived as being a bit silly, if that makes sense.
I understand that point, but the onus is on members to read the reports, and if they have a lack of understanding of any of the report, then to go to their officer and ask for some explanation if they feel that they want to do that without losing face.
I wonder, without digressing too much though, whether going back to the members' side of things, there's a training or development opportunity here, because I think that a lot of members do not know how to scrutinise. And I apologise, it's the first one of your meetings I've been to, so if I'm treading on toes and stuff, then I apologise. But I think there is a bit of a training need or a development need for sort of members. And I don't mean that in a critical way. I just mean in a genuine way. People need to know what sort of questions they should be asking and how they should ask, and not be afraid to ask what might be silly questions.
Well, that leads me to my next point, which is that we need some sexy scrutiny training. In other words, we need to make it. We need to make it interesting, because certainly we don't want it online, which is dreadful. I'm sure we all lose the will to live with online training. But we want somehow we need to make it sexy, because we have members who are missing. And as you say, they don't seem to understand what the questions are. Fairly simple: who, what, why, when, and how. But they don't seem to want to ask those questions. But yes, we've got to somehow engage with the other members of the council and get them to come along to scrutiny. We had a really interesting training session on motions, but unfortunately there were only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us there, and it was a good, fun training session. But how you can get across to members of the council that it can be such, I don't know. But I've been to some good, fun training sessions. Councillor Wheeler.
I mean, Chairman, to me, there's 2 options. One, I think what went really well before, when we had some training before full council meetings, so people there, they were in the chamber, it was about half hour before. I can't remember what it was, that's how good it was. But it was quite a lot of us there. If I remember, it was Beacon Development Corporation, so maybe it was, if that comes to mind. But it was quite a lot of people were there, and because the problem is with diaries, trying to do all these different things, people have got so many commitments. Some people might have to say, well, sacrifice one thing. Oh, that's not mandatory. No one's going to know. It's not going to come on, register me at the 10. I won't go to that one. You can kind of see the logic, even if you don't agree with it. You can see people have got busy lifestyles. Also, the county council will be doing scrutiny training because they're switching to a cabinet model and being scrutiny system in. So whether we could tie in with them to obviously cut down costs as well, but look at how they're doing it. And I mean, I know the LG maybe get all these emails every day from they do various training sessions to perhaps see how they're doing it as well, and feedback they get from other councils, what works, how they get the best attendance. But we can't be the only council where there's like 2 or 3 people turning up to it there. So that's the 2 options to me to look at. Tie it in with when everyone's here anyway. But also small sessions. I think I did one training session once. It was like 3 hours. And even though, I mean, I got the 10th span of a nap anyway. But when you get to that point where you're not going to take it in, I think it's a short, sharp. Even if you've got to do it over 3 or 4 different sessions, about intensive half hour to keep everyone interested in it.
But we have got to do something, because I do feel there are members of the council who don't understand how important scrutiny is, and this is the one area where you can actually make a difference.
Also, on the point, Chairman, to think about if you can get reports out earlier. I think there might be some of our council, perhaps on experience, who perhaps don't feel confident on the subject knowledge because they're seeing it for the first time, potentially on presentation and want to go away, research a bit more, look into which you can argue they should do when the agenda is there. Once you see the detail behind the presentation, I think that wise I see that for some newer members of the council, I think, who feel like they don't have that confidence yet to speak, and perhaps where we can give that as much information up front as possible, and then potentially as well as a chairman, because I should have done more, a couple of members of my group, my knowledge, perhaps have more conversations beforehand and go, look, definitely not sure about, have those conversations, try to give them the confidence to speak more. Something I'll do to take away from that. But I think that information hopefully gives them the confidence. We all know if you're more confident on a subject matter, you're more likely to speak. You don't think you're like an idiot. That's the absolute logic of it. Or some of our colleagues county council will just speak anyway, they don't know what they're on about. But like I say, you don't get to that stage. But I think if we look at that, perhaps if we get the people speaking more and more occasions.
Right, well, perhaps we'll take some of that back. I shall bring this up at the time when we get to them, but when we talk about matrices and we discuss them, can you make sure they're covering all the points that you want covered? Because that's the time to do it. So the officers know when they're preparing their reports that they've covered everything that we wanted covering. So just remember that. I do want to just report on, I attended the East Midlands Scrutiny Working event, as Charlotte and I do regularly. And the latest one was actually quite personal because it was on flooding. And there were two very interesting presentations. One was from Lincolnshire, which is a county council. I appreciate that. But they actually have a dedicated scrutiny committee just for flooding. Now, you can understand that to some degree because it's Lincolnshire, it's flat and they get a lot of flooding. But I'm afraid to say we're all getting a lot of flooding now. And I think we maybe want to be considering that, particularly when we're talking about planning and the role the county council play in the borough's planning decisions. I found the whole of that very interesting. And I did actually pass that on to the environmental chairman at the county council, who was also very interested. I don't know who that is. And following on from that, I did wonder if in fact you would like the opportunity of being invited to those events. If there is something that might be, I can see Jonathan's face, but I would only say if there was something on the agenda that was of particular interest. But if you'd like the opportunity of being invited, then Charlotte and I did suggest that maybe we should be inviting the chairman. Okay, right, that's me done. So I now pass on to Councillor Wheeler, as you're on the front row.
Oh, so this is why you sit at the back of the class so you can get picked on. Right, okay, so our meeting was 7th of October. The first item was to review the police performance and resource allocation within Rushcliffe. So it's a scrutiny item. I actually walked through the matrix a couple of years ago with the previous inspector. I wanted to count on the extra resource that the government's obviously put into policing Rushcliffe to make sure we're happy going to the right place. So as you know, I've got a new inspector, Rob Lawton, who's not been post very long. So I think he was doing before going, what do you actually want to hear? But I was quite nervous, but actually he came across really well with his ideas for the future. And the main thing we brought across was the return to having a dedicated officer for each area, because that accountability for council to be able to say, have that relationship with a local PC who's covering it. I know that, and that's happening in quite a lot of areas. So there's one in Bolton, I know, and there's one covering the Trent Bridge area, and then a few other areas. And one's more coming on board over the next couple of months. Just quite a new people join the team. So it's getting that right balance. So we can't have what we did before where we had the numbers for these PCs everywhere. What happening was probably ringing those PCs, getting them on the day off, and rather than going to 999. So I completely understand that. But it was more the relationship between councillors and other public officials, because at the minute I was just sending everything to Rob or to local PCSO. There was no in between really, rather than that bit to go through. So that was really positive. In terms of crime, it's changed slightly because of in terms of the statistics we've seen because of obviously lockdown. So we weren't seeing as many robberies, we're seeing a lot more antisocial behaviour and domestic incidents at home. So what was happening going to that? We've got Operation Reach that's going well in terms of the speeding as well. Going looking at the various issues we've got across Westbridge in particular with long roads where there's been a lot of speeding issues. So a lot of resource going to reviewing where we are. There's key areas that the police look at. So, for example, key priorities should say where they've got extra resources. So we've got antisocial behaviour at Walton and Cotgrave, which at the moment, and that's being reviewed, targets going forwards. What the group wanted to make sure was that if those aren't on the list, they're still getting the correct resource allocation. And Inspector Lawson made it clear that he has to pick priorities out of the registration. Doesn't mean anything gets ignored. I think that was really important. And also for local members, if they know a particular issue in the patch, to see that through. So they're putting the case forward if they think that there's a particular issue in their area that should be a higher priority to get obviously that more of a focus on it. So I think that's a really key message that we need to go out there to our wider group, just to make sure people know to have that relationship with them. So pretty good item, about an hour in length, and a lot of questions going forwards. And like I say, really conscious that talks are not there very long, but I think the question, I think Councillor McGree was really positive, where he wants to be a lot more proactive in terms of relationship with councillors as well, and a lot more focus on being out the beat, which is the point I made clear, especially around issues I have in my own division, Camps North, is that people think, well, we're the police, so they might get out on patrol. I said, make it on social media, take a picture when you're out on patrol. Tell people you're out there, and accuse people really reassured by that, because you might be out on patrol regularly. If no one sees you, they just think, oh, we don't see the police, because right, so they're not seeing, they're not at home. So yeah, that was really positive. And the second item was reviewing the performance of the Young Project Positive Futures. So it was nice to be brought back, because it was actually our first item and the new scrutiny we looked at the time. But with the impact of COVID and the lockdown, we thought it was really important to review where we're up to. And I think it is the largest amount of money that we give away to external organisations to deliver service on behalf. And actually, it was really positive what the team's doing. I mean, during lockdown, they were going over and beyond, to be honest. They were, in terms of what they were trying to do to keep the relationship going with children, trying to look at different ways. So they were trying to meet them in parks, for example, have a just kick about, have football, have a chat with people under the Positive Futures program to keep that relationship. Because these young people with the greater needs they have, more likely to be impacted really if they've got troubled home lives and are not getting extra support at school, and if they're locked away at home all day. So on the PR we got is really positive. The Young Project, obviously, with things like the use of the markets, on various trips, obviously that stopped during lockdown, but that's really got going again. They've got new ambassadors for every school in place. I also put Mark Clifford in contact with County Council in terms of the Friendships Graduate Scheme that we're doing a lot of work to relaunch. Not relaunch, trying to expand, in terms of relationship, trying to build a relationship going there too. Some of these people are going with a lot of time investment in, they might be going off, to make sure we can try to keep them locally, with the talent there, and to work with organisations, not just the County Council. The County Council works with a lot of local business as well, so hopefully that could be really positive going forwards. I think overall, we were just really impressed by what John British Community Trust are doing. Mark Clifford, I've got a lot of respect for, because I've been come to various scrutiny groups I've been on while I've been a councillor, and he's always got that passion for it and really believes in what he does. It's not a job to him, it's a vocation of his whole team. So really thanks on behalf of the council. I think it's still running well spent, and obviously our thanks also have to go to the Cricket Club, because the money they put into that project as well for their charitable, they cover the running costs, and they say what that team do, and they kept the team going after the easy sort of, I think it's supposed to not cut back or scale back after the loss of income they've had over the pandemic as well, but they keep that investment there as well, so we should really thank them. And that was it for me. Let's have anything else.
Just 2 comments for me. Thank you, Chair. Just echo the words of Inspector Lawton. Fantastic. Fully agree what Councillor Wheeler said. We did ward walk with the inspector, and that visibility that you just mentioned was fantastic, because folks came up and straight away e-scooters, other issues, etc. So bringing that out was absolutely fantastic. And the other one, Positive Futures, fully agree. The work over lockdown. The one thing just to highlight was mental health. There's a lot of young people who have suffered, and mental health hasn't been the greatest. And the work that the team's done, as Councillor Wheeler just mentioned, has been fantastic. So just 2 points I just wanted to mention, highlight, and echo. Thank you.
Can I just ask, did you invite or did you think to invite the cabinet members for?
Yeah, so I should say that for the police, we did invite Councillor Ingus along, which was, you know, he also had a bit of Q&A with Council about a couple of issues around the policy. So that was really good, and obviously thank Councillor Ingus for his time there. With Councillor, on the other item, I didn't think it was necessary at that time. The question, we weren't questioning the policy at all of having the relationship positive future, just more about understanding what they've done during lockdown. So it wasn't a case of we were reviewing, do you think it's money well spent? Because I think, to be honest, we knew it was. We just really wanted to get that feedback with the policing. The reason we brought Right Councillor Ingus on was just to make sure, from a policy point of view, because he's our representative on the police scrutiny panel as well, to make sure putting forward what the group fed back, which was really about, like, their focus neighbourhood policing and to have that accountability locally. So it was really useful to have him there to hear that feedback directly from the group. I know he watched all the meeting on YouTube, but in the firing line, so we could pro verbal thing was always useful. So he won't come back again now, but anyway, we brought him on for one time. So no, it was really useful to have the camera member there as well.
That all sounds very positive. But I'm afraid I did hear, I think you had a problem with miscommunications regarding work programs, maybe?
At one point, one of our members raised, which, no, I do agree to an extent, is around, it's very strange because we agree a work program, then obviously the work program comes here, and then that can be changed around. Like, for example, at the previous corporate group, we had an item during a very short notice because our group meeting was the next week, if I recall, the week after. So it was a bit of a, it really wasn't messy. We just sort of brought one item ready to go in there and went forwards. I think members of our group felt quite really a bit grieved, saying, well, what's the point of us agreeing work program when you can change it all at corporate group? What's the point of having the item on the agenda? And the point we also made was we have to agree work program where we're working to. There might be something that changed short notice, but what we did with feedback, which we're going to raise in the next item when we look at work programs anyway, so we just look at the screen items. That communication, if at the earliest opportunity we believe an item can't be on there, you know, the principal, the lead officer, you know, Darryl Burton in our case, to have a conversation with Council will talk to the members of the group to explain why. I think obviously at the last group meeting, it was the first I heard about it was at the meeting. We noticed that we had to fill that item and change that relation. So that's changed now. So we're not going over ground. We've had that. I've had that conversation separately, so that's right to do so. But I think going forward, it's got to be absolutely certain when things are changed, we're being transparent as to why, and if it's clear reason, as soon as possible, so that we can feedback, because we can't just, we're here as representative of our group as well. And so obviously, I think that was the feedback was going, well, what's the point in going forwards here? So I think we addressed it the right way, and I think I've had a conversation afterwards. I think happy where we need to be at the moment, but I think we just need to bear that in mind. You can see why members of our screening groups might feel a bit out of the loop on certain items. I can see I probably would in their situation, in their situation. So that's just what we're supposed to realise.
I think that was a bit of an extraordinary event.
Yeah.
Perhaps Charlotte would like to elaborate.
I think there's one thing that I would very much like you to take back to your groups. So the last report on your agendas is always the work programme report. What it should do is reflect the discussion that we have here this evening, because ultimately this is where the work programme for each of the scrutiny groups is decided. That's why we spend so much time looking at the matrices and deciding what goes on the agendas. The work programme report that you get is really just for information so that your members know what's coming up at the next meeting. Now, in your last community scrutiny group, it went awry because there was an item on there that there shouldn't have been. So we were picking that information up from the wrong version of our work programme. But I think it's important, and it may be something that I need to address, is that all members of scrutiny understand the way the work flows, and it comes through this group, and you make a decision on what goes on the work programmes for your groups going forward. It doesn't go the other way around. And if councillors on scrutiny groups, or any councillors, want to put an item on a scrutiny agenda, it comes forward to this group in the form of the matrices so that we can actually discuss it here.
And I do understand that point, Charlotte, I do, but then I think you've got to understand, if the way the work programs are laid out, you said this particular day, we're going to look at these two items. So if you're looking at it, go, well, that is still what we're agreeing to at the moment, and that's the way the word on the work program is not worded as this is, you know, this is what we're looking at potentially might be around. It's worded agreed to the work program for this committee. So I think we need to look at the wording of how we do the reports, because you can, it's basically worded as it used to be on the old screening groups, which is well, this is your work program, do you agree to it? End of. And I think that's so. I think it's easy for us because you understand it. Well, I understand your point, and we understand it from a point. I think we've got to understand how people are looking at on our committee as well. So potentially if we look at restructuring, say these are the items that kind of work plan we're looking at, maybe not even give a set date, do you agree with these items, if you want to change on there, do you agree to empower chairman and vice chairman to when it comes to the next corporate group meeting? But then also we need to look at the meeting date. So our meeting was on 10th of October. We're now having one here now. Perhaps we need to look at cycles. So corporate overview is always the first of that particular cycle. So we're agreeing to that. And when we get to all our various our screening meetings, we can get the update information rather than change it and about here and there.
That's a very good point. We've already picked up on the fact that the cycle has just got out of whack this year. So in 2 occasions, we've had your meetings, and I think to a certain extent growth and development as well has happened before a COG meeting, which means twice you've had a scrutiny matrix to look at that hasn't been discussed here, which is not an ideal situation. With regard to the report, obviously we'll go away and have a look at the language that we use in that report and make sure that it's very clear what's going on. The final point that I just wanted to make is that it's important that we don't get too bogged down in the red tape and bureaucracy, because at the end of the day, we need to be fleet of foot, and occasionally there will be items that really do, for one point or another, need to come to scrutiny very swiftly without being on a forward work programme, without coming through this group. Now, when something like that does happen, I make sure that I call the chairman, hopefully lead officers are calling you, and those discussions are taking place. And we'll always come back and close the loop at this meeting and explain why that has happened. But we do need to make sure that we're not stuck in stone. We don't sit by the procedure, because there will be occasions where we need to bring things forward more swiftly than that.
Yeah, and obviously when it's situations like that, we can obviously easily explain it. Go, look, this has to be brought forward, and we'll explain it to members. But I think also to bear in mind, some of our members are put items through a matrix. They've got a bit of personal involvement, and then when they're bumped, I think with one item that was bumped up 4 meetings, various reasons. Well, isn't everyone with the waste strategy, which again we can explain. So the government get the finger out, we can't do anything about it. But then also we've got, if we give an example, the community facilities item, which we bumped about 3 or 4 times because we're still waiting on about a briefing note. But you can see why bigger councils might start to feel a bit, well, this does not matter then. If you keep bumping it, why should I get involved and putting things through the matrix if all you're going to do is keep changing when it is or bump it down the line? So I think great points to Charlotte. I think we've just got to bear in mind how members have been then. And after the conversation I had with some people, that's how they've been. I can see why. I remember being about pension scrutiny, and I felt the same way. We didn't have that involvement, and we don't want to get down that route again.
Yes, I understand it is difficult, but we do need to be flexible. It does become a sort of priorities. We have some to discuss later today, which we're juggling around, and hopefully you will join in the debate over them. And it does become difficult, so we do need to be flexible. Right, so let's move on to Chairman's reports. I think Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Regrettably, I was not able to attend my own scrutiny group meeting. I was detained, not at Her Majesty's pleasure, but at the NHS's pleasure, whilst I was self-isolating. I could give you a report on everything I did while I was self-isolating, but I think it would be more interesting if I invited my Vice Chairman, Councillor Butler, who chaired the meeting admirably, to give a report on the meeting.
Oh, you're too kind, Councillor Clark. Yes, the committee met on the 13th of October. There were 2 items on the agenda. The first one was an update on SIL, the Community Infrastructure Levy. We had well, going back to presentations, we had a long and detailed presentation explaining what SIL is, but also what S106 is, without getting too anarchy here, because there is still, I think, a genuine lack of understanding, even amongst those of us who are perhaps supposed to know these things, what the difference is between SIL and S106. And as you can see, it's already driven a person away, such as the excitement of SIL. So yeah, so we had this presentation, but more importantly, SIL, the council's had a SIL policy in place since 2019. Coming up to 2 years, actually, the policy has been in place, but we still haven't, or have yet to decide how we're going to allocate the monies raised by SIL. Now, as you know, SIL it covers a much wider area than just a specific 106 planning application. So what the committee was required to do and did do is going to make recommendations to council, to cabinet, as to what the spending priorities of the SIL monies raised is. Unfortunately, I wrote these down. The key areas of spend for SIL will be secondary school places, the transport related matters, park and ride and buses in the West Bridgton area in particular, leisure and health facilities across the borough, including a couple of the borough's own leisure centres, which are in need of upgrading and bringing up to date, and similarly playing field strategy as well. So those are the recommendations that are going to be made to cabinet. One will assume that that will go forward. So I think, oh yes, and we also made an additional recommendation as well, that at the end of the day, joking aside, it is a big important issue and complicated as well. The parish councils have a role to play in this. And the way SIL legislation or policy works at the moment is that parish councils are entitled to a percentage of the SIL money raised as a whole. And at the moment, if a parish council has a status of, or has a neighbourhood plan status in place, they get up to 25% of a SIL payout. Whereas if a parish doesn't have neighbourhood plan status, they get 15%. Now, it was generally thought that to make it more equitable for the borough as a whole, that it would be desirable to increase the 15% limit for neighbourhood plan areas to also be up to 25% as well. Now, some might say, well, where is the incentive then for parishes to have a neighbourhood plan in place? Because obviously that takes a lot of work to do. But it was pointed out that SIL is there anyway, irrespective of whether a neighbourhood plan is there. And a neighbourhood plan doesn't just decide on what SIL is going to be spent on. A neighbourhood plan is a much wider, broader remit than just spending a SIL allocation. So we're going to be we have recommended to cabinet that parishes, irrespective of whether they have neighbourhood plans or not, should be entitled to up to 25% of the SIL payout. And then linked to the parishes as well is, because it is a complex area, we are going to suggest, or we have suggested, bringing out some sort of guidance to parishes to just explain to them what it all means for them, as a sort of FAQ, easy read guide as to what SIL is all about and how it affects them. The other item on the agenda was the COVID-19 recovery plan. That's a good example of what you were talking about a moment ago, where you can bring items to an agenda if it's urgent. And obviously nothing could be a lot more urgent at the moment than the world we're in, the COVID world. But we had a very detailed update and explanation as to what the borough, what the council has done in particular to aid business recovery in the borough. I think we were all quite astonished to read and be told that in the last 18 months since we've got ourselves in this new world, that the council has allocated £36 million worth of business rates. I mean, that's phenomenal. And we wanted to know, we were keen to see how we compared with other districts and boroughs of similar demographics. And I think it's fair to say that we are up ahead of the game. We are doing a damn good job in getting not just the business grants out, but all the other help that we're offering in terms of things like the web portal that's there to advise and help businesses. The high street recovery, the town centre recovery work that's going on as well. We're spending money on this consultant to hopefully help try and get the high streets up and running again. And it's still early days, but the indications is that things like furlough payments and unemployment rates have slowed in the last few months, having reached a peak when COVID at its peak. There are signs that things are recovering, but there is no doubt about it, there is still a long way to go as well. It's going to be at least another 18 months or 2 years before business and high street gets back to anywhere near where it was before COVID hit. So that, I think, will be a subject that will come back, and I think people will want it to come back for further scrutiny. Whether it's at the next meeting, I suspect not, but certainly perhaps in the spring sometime will be a time to look at that. And I think that covered pretty much everything that we discussed. But as you weren't there, Mr. Chairman, you won't know, would you?
Well, actually, I did have my eye on you because actually I was watching on.
Oh, on YouTube.
Although I have to say as a sideline, the signal was very distorted. And,
Yes, there was a noise.
not easy to hear what was going on.
And
But I
we
just want to record my thanks to Councillor Butler for chairing.
we also couldn't see them because we were hidden behind
All the presentations.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chairman. That prompts me to say yes. Can we? And this isn't just scrutiny meeting. This is generally meetings. It is incredibly frustrating that you sort of sign on to YouTube or wherever to watch a meeting, and all you see is when somebody's finished their presentation and the recommendations or the last concluding slide is left up on the screen permanently, and or you can hear voices, but you haven't got a clue who's talking, and you can't see what's going on, so you can't get a flavour of the meeting at all. So I think that, and members of the committee have got the recommendations on their agendas, and for anybody watching on the screen, I think once they've seen the recommendations, I'm sure they don't want to be watching the recommendations for the next half an hour while they can hear all these voices going on. So I think it ought to be the absolute norm that as soon as a presentation is done, that's it. You go back and so you can see the screen, because also these cameras are, I have to say, useless because they don't show individuals. They only show a general panoramic of the room. So you can't actually identify who is speaking quite often. You can hear a voice.
I beg to differ slightly on that, if I may, in defence.
Well, I don't know whether I will allow you to beg to differ.
Because you're right, they don't focus on one person speaking, but they do point in the general direction. But a little sign, if it's set up properly, name appears on the screen. Councillor Clark speaking.
If it's not that.
Well, yeah, but
sometimes.
but definitely a lesson has been learnt, I think, about the turning off the PowerPoint or whatever presentation at the end of that. That definitely is something else. Sorry to.
So perhaps you'll take that back.
It's very useful feedback. Thank you very much. I just would like to add that yes, we're aware that sound quality has been patchy to say the least. But we had the AV company came in last week. I hope, fingers crossed, yeah, it's looking good. Yeah. If we go back and listen tomorrow to this recording, we are hoping for crystal clear quality.
Anyway, if I could just say that sounds as though both chairman and vice chairman have reported very positive outcomes to their last scrutiny meetings, which sounds good. So let's hope everything going forward will be the same. Now I think we have some feedback from Charlotte.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So just this is a kind of comeback item. So when we went through our scrutiny transition, you very kindly gave me the option of speaking at the meetings about what we've been doing and how things were progressing. And at the last meeting, the chairman asked for me to have my slot back just so that I could update. So the three things that I wanted to talk about, one has already been passed, which is I'm really pleased to see that the new arrangements for the papers and the brought forward briefings is working from an officer's point of view. Actually, it's great because we get those reports a little bit earlier. We've got a little bit of time to make sure they're good quality coming out to you, and the agendas are getting published on time, which is brilliant. So I'm glad that's working for both of us. Councillor Cumberbatch has also mentioned the East Midlands Scrutiny Network, which we went to recently, looked at flooding. The next meeting is in December and it is focusing on a COVID-19 response. Now, I will leave that one with you because later on when we talk about scrutiny matrices, you'll see that we also have one of those on our agenda. So if you agree that, it may be worth some of us going along to that and seeing what other councils have done in terms of their scrutiny of the COVID-19 response of their organisations. So whilst we won't be in a position necessarily at that point to contribute, it's very interesting seeing what other people have been doing. The final point that I just wanted to raise is that a couple of days ago, I received the Pedals top 5 priorities for cycling in Rushcliffe, following on from the 3rd cycling forum, which was held last week. Councillor Clark, third, yes, third. On the basis that I know when you discussed cycling networks back in July, it was one of those days where you had lots of very long presentations, lots of information to take on board. And I know that there was a desire to bring that back for more debate and discussion. So I'll raise that again when we get onto work programmes. If you want to fit that in, we've actually got something that we can bring in terms of something to get your teeth into, something a bit meaty. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, well, that does lead us nicely into work programmes. Oh, we?
Unless you want to change the order again.
Oh,
It's
yes.
up to you which order you take. It really doesn't matter.
Well, I think it'd be better if we went straight into the work programmes. That seems to make sense to me. It seems to flow better. Right. Yes, right. Where are we? Moving into the matrices which have come forward. There is one which is here for information that has already been scrutinised in October, the one which caused the little problem. So that is there for information and administration. The next one is from Councillor Thomas, and she's asking for scrutiny of solar energy. Now my feeling is that solar is just one alternative energy. There are several alternative energies and others that are probably coming along the pipeline. And therefore we should, if we're going to scrutinise this, we should be scrutinising all alternative energies. I don't know what you as members think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Madam Chairman, and whilst we are looking at it, because I would suggest almost certainly it would come up in the conversation and the discussion anyway. It'd be difficult to isolate the discussion purely towards solar farms. I'm sure people will want to broaden their comments anyway. So I've no problem at all in the item going forward, but as you suggest, referring to alternative forms, because we can remind ourselves about our policies on wind turbines and all sorts of different methods of energy recovery. Yeah. So with that broadening of it, let's go for it.
Yeah, what I understand about broadening it, I think the focus here is literally on solar. So whilst there are other forms of renewable sources, I think there's quite a lot here. And when I was reading, I would like to understand and all the various bullet points. There is quite a lot. So you've got the solar farms, you've got solar panels on roofs. There's so much around solar. I think that it'd be an idea to focus on one element here, which is solar, and then and I don't know how this would work, but I'm just going to say it, with having a look at other renewable sources. Maybe that's a different matrix, or I'm not sure how that would work. But I think focusing just on solar farms here, or not to reword it, but just solar.
I'm somewhat conscious of council time for separate scrutiny items. And I don't know, but I feel that we'd end up with discussing an alternative energy supply every year, rather than looking at them as a whole. Sorry.
May I make a suggestion? So I've appreciated what everybody said so far. There are a number of things to take into account there. What might be a proposed way forward? There's a lot of very detailed questions, as Councillor Bansal says, in this, particularly about solar. Councillor Thomas has put it forward. She's also sent me a map, which if you would like me to share with you, I'm more than welcome to do that. But her concerns relate to the current planning applications that are in place, and she's seeking more information. Now, if we put this on the agenda for any of the scrutiny groups as it stands at the moment, we won't be looking at it until next July, August time. That to me won't satisfy her request for information. However, if we were to take on board and say, actually, we'd like to broaden this out and have a look at alternative energies in the whole and to do a piece of scrutiny around that, and we'll do it next summer. But in the meantime, officers can have a look at the questions that you've sent us and actually set about answering some of those in the short term. That will satisfy both her request for information and allow you to have a look at alternative energies at a time where we've got enough in the programme for us to be able to do that.
Answer that.
I think that makes total sense.
Yeah, just on the broader point, I think what's important, I think Charlotte touched on, there's a lot of questions in there, which to me don't like scrutinised, about answers back from officers about, just as it says, so that needs to be addressed first of all, because I think it's such a wide piece of work. It's a very important piece of work, but you could miss the point of what we could scrutinise. For example, if I pick points out that it's around the planning policy, what you rightly say about the solar panels on homes, also the solar farms. I know there's quite a few applications as well. I'm assuming it's coming from, but I think you've got to really focus on scrutinise what the council. What we've got to remember what scrutiny is on our current policy, and should that be changed, and what feedback should go back. Because if we give an example from our scrutiny group about waste strategy, we could do the waste strategy and just pay lip service. The reason we're delaying it is because of waiting for the government's strategy, the paper pile, which again will be God knows when. But at least there's no point in saying we should do this, or let's bring in glass collection, spend millions of pounds, bring it in, and the next day the government go, well, why are we just wasting our money for? I mean, that's similar to look at. I know there's so much coming out to go at the moment on, again, it's been laid on around housing and what should go in there. So be really careful that don't want to waste. Got to absolutely make sure that item doesn't fulfil what it can do, what Council Thomas wants it to do, by focus on bits that, again, shouldn't be scrutinising. So I think that's what we've got to be really, really careful of there. But like I say, if you look at that from most questions asked, I'd say 70% should be direct officer come back on to start with and focus on what we actually do.
Yeah, that was similar to what I was going to comment on, because some of these are purely questions to officers for information that can be obtained, or any question to an officer. And I would be nervous about, in the context of, in relation to applications coming up, etc., I would like to lay a bet with you that it would start to tread on the toes of the applications, and a real danger that, well, hang on a minute, we can't discuss that because we're starting to predetermine the application, and I cannot see how you could have a discussion solely on this in relation to applications without it either intentionally or unintentionally starting to, as I say, preempt future discussions on applications. So I think that's why it should be kept in a generalised nature of policies not in relation to specifics.
Sorry, just one quick final comment. Fully agree about splitting it, and there is a lot of question. I think for the future work, when you look at it, there's a lot more things happening in the future as well, like heat pumps and things like that. So I think it makes sense. It's early technology. We're only going to learn more over the period of time. So that's why I agree with everything that's been mentioned. Just want to bring that point up.
In actual fact, that would be the broad concept of what we just talked about is what we need to talk about at training. That any matrices that comes in, anything we're going to scrutinise should pertain to the whole of the borough, not specifically to one area. It should be the whole of the borough because we are acting as the borough council. That's probably something we need to bring into training. Right, so we agree then that we're going to be looking at scrutinising alternative energies.
Can I suggest that I work with Councillor Clark on coming up with a differently worded scrutiny matrix that we will bring forward for the next meeting that looks at the alternative energies and emerging technologies across the board that we can bring forward again next year.
Slightly pedantic point. You said we'll look at alternative energies. I think we look at the policies relating to alternative energy. We're not going to look at actual alternative energy in itself.
It sounds as though it'll be very good that you work with Councillor Clark. Oh, sorry, I'm in. Oh, sorry, I've turned the page. Right, yes, sorry. Sports development in Rushcliffe. Yes, the one brought forward by Councillor Walker. Does anybody wish to comment?
I think, Chair, I just want to see Councillor Walker. It's great because again, he's brought through many items to the matrix. So, and I think looking at sports development risk from speak to him and seeing what we were going to have a similar item brought to scrutiny already. Obviously, such a key part of what the Borough Council does, and it's really important to look at what the council can do to further support that development, because we know there's a lot of independent clubs like Westbridge Culture, fantastic what they do then, there's such a well-oiled machine there, but there's also other clubs trying to merge and perhaps need some more guidance from ourselves to work forwards on, and also yeah, particular issue we had recently, for example, when Gresham was being redeveloped, there was a lack of pitches available. So when some clubs wanted to start up again after the pandemic, Westbridge Culture, for example, just didn't have the pitches available to play on. There just weren't enough in the borough. You know, really complimentary of the work that Derek was doing, trying to help that, just because we was delayed because of the pandemic and the supply chain to sort out Gresham. There just wasn't that resilience in place. I think that's what's really a key part of that as well to look at. So I do think it's important we do that, because that was just one example that showed, you know, perhaps we need to look at what else we could do to have plan B, C, D in place so that it sort of doesn't fall flat. Because if it wasn't for how well run that club is, they could easily have stopped teams the whole year. So look, we can't guarantee, so we're not going to do these clubs. They looked at different ways and managed to find a way around it. But clubs that haven't got that kind of network in place could easily just let hundreds of kids just not play sport for this year.
Yes, I think it's important we probably scrutinise this, because part of our strapline is that Rushcliffe is good for sport. And you mentioned Gresham, and I went to the opening of Gresham, which is an amazing facility, absolutely fantastic. So yes, I think it's important that we do look into this, particularly for our young people, development of our young people. Councillor Bansal?
Yeah, just I think this is a good one. There's probably two things in here that I think kind of stand out. One is the barriers to increasing participation. You know, I know a lot of people that don't do a lot of sports for a number of reasons, could be religious reasons, and they just see barriers where they don't think they can. So I think this is really good to kind of have a look at that. And secondly, as Councillor Wheeler mentioned, you know, there's a lot of clubs and sporting facilities within here. The schools as well, the links, I think is very vital as well. You've got a lot of young folks, and I sound really old when I say that now, but a lot of young kids, thank you. A lot of young kids coming through who are really, really talented. And we've got some amazing sports personalities living within our borough anyway. So connecting all that together, I think would be great.
And in addition to that, of course, if we can, we produce the best sporting facilities, its impacts on health.
Absolutely.
And
Perhaps
mental
something to build on, which again I haven't cleared Councillor Walker, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind. When we do this new application, look at how that impact the SIL and 106. I know that's been covered by gross scrutiny, but how that money is going to sports development. So, for example, what funded Gresham was a lot of the work on Wilford Fields, for example, the development of Wilford Lane. Also looking at potentially going forwards with the areas that are being developed. If I give an example, at Walton, look at community physical that's being done, auxiliary, built on, because I understand the need to do that, but really that should be part of that fundamental process that starts as well. So looking at if we can, as a council, send out a strong message to all developers, say when you are putting these applications in place, we want sport as key component as schools are, as medical facilities are, because that needs to happen, because we don't have awareness facilities. But why should, again, talk about barriers, people, are they going to want to go a couple of miles to go and want to play football? There's a pitch on their doorstep, they're more likely to get involved and learn.
And with our increase in housing, we must make sure that we are keeping up to speed with sport. So, yes.
Just one further point, obviously, I discussed the matrices internally with officers before I come here to get a bit of a background and to be able to give you a steer. One of the comments that Derek Hayden made when he had a look at this was the potential for broadening it out slightly to also encompass the health and well-being aspect of what we do. Sport England have changed their focus from funding people already engaged in sport to targeting the inactive, the people who are foreseeing barriers, who don't get involved, who then have an ongoing health problem because they aren't fit and healthy and don't get involved, and of course miss out on the social aspects of joining in with sport. So he was keen to bring that aspect in as well, just to broaden it out slightly and to fit in more appropriately with the Sport England emphasis at the moment on getting people engaged in sport and the benefits that can bring for their health and well-being.
That's
I think that's absolutely fantastic. I coach under 10s football, and I did my FA level 1. And when I was doing it, he said, "You're one of the first Sikh people I've seen come through. Want it more from your community come?" And I said, "There's barriers." So I think that's fantastic.
But just final point, and I agree with that. I think on level of detail going forwards in terms of the health and wellbeing, I think that's been really important to have those briefing notes, presentations ready, because under a lot of detail, and just want to make sure that, again, from up to the points we made, that detail can be fully digested by members, so we can look at that detail and address, because otherwise that presentation could be over an hour, which I have no problem with, don't get me wrong. But again, we talk about engagement and scrutiny. After an hour listening to a presentation, those questions might not be as focused as they could be if we can make sure we're really on top of that. So I'll speak to Darryl as well, John, but just to get that feedback. I think when we got those kind of items like that, which have a lot of substance to it, and rightly so, that we just make sure as much information we get out as early as possible to digest beforehand.
I'm not on. So you won't have heard any of that. No, I better say it all again. Large piece of work, which is going to be too big I think, for one scrutiny item, and therefore needs to be split into internal, what affects Rushcliffe internally, and externally, what affects the borough. So, any comments on that? Do you agree with that, or? I can see some nods, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chairman. I think, like you say, it's such an important piece of work. If you try to supply more than you two, you could miss out some key points. I think it's definitely nice. It should be two, if not three. I mean, obviously, a lot of councils have their own committee just for COVID resilience recovery. You know, we did the county, I think, so it just shows it's a big piece of work. But like you say, we just can't rush that because there's going to be lots of dodges, and obviously we're not through it yet anyway. So we've got to make sure that
Precisely.
it's not rushed to it.
And if we're going to do it properly, we've probably got to do it in chunks. So we take that one forward then. Anybody want to add anything to it? Big enough as it is. All right, well, that leads us then into the individual work programmes. As we've said, normally it's rolling programmes. But in February, the impact of COVID is possibly going to be brought to corporate overview group. So would this be the internal or external?
I would suggest that we do the internal in February. We look at that facing internally, and then decide that I would suggest that we have a look at the external stuff the following meeting, which I think is May. The only implication with that is, of course, we already have other items on those agendas.
And we've got diversity,
Yeah.
which has already been moved from February.
Diversity is a relatively small item. I don't have a problem with that one being on the agenda at the same time as the external COVID focus, because whilst that will look at the community impact of COVID, don't forget that growth and development have already taken care of all of that business growth and the impact on businesses and such like. So we're not planning to repeat that work, but we will refer to it. So it'll be a slightly more condensed item. The one that concerns me is the resident survey, and I would like to suggest that perhaps we move that to our colleagues over in the community scrutiny group. They would like to look at that one in January, along with the housing development plan.
Yeah. Well, I think it makes more sense to go there rather than come to this group anyway, to be perfectly honest. And potentially you could even argue the diversity report as well. I mean, if you say it's a small item, go here, but really that could be something that perhaps should look forward to go through the community maybe as well. Maybe not, say why not.
It's the diversity of our workforce and such like. It's a corporate issue. It's not about diversity within our community, which is where you're looking outwardly.
Councillor Wheeler, while we take the work programmes in the order they present themselves. Governance scrutiny. There's a new item on there, value for money statement. Would you like to enlighten me on that? I understand value for money, but what are we talking about here?
It's a new piece of work to come out of government legislation. So it's for our external auditors to decide whether we are providing value for money, and it's being looped in with the statement of accounts and the external audit report, which will be on the next agenda.
Right. Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah. I'll get used to this game one day. Right, growth and development. Now, you've mentioned cycling part 2. And are we thinking we'll bring that in January?
Oh, sorry, no, that's fine. I've worked both mics. There's a reason why Councillor Cumberbatch is suggesting January, and it's to do with us proposing a move to the conservation areas item. Now, the reason for this is because you asked a question earlier on, Councillor Clark, about what new resources we've got in planning. So let me just answer that question for you. So we have replaced Nick Cox, who was our third principal planning officer. So their replacement starts this side of Christmas. We also have a new principal planning officer coming in. He will be taking care of various areas, enforcement, conservation and such like. Now that's why this item is moving. But just before I get to that point, we've also got a couple of new planning officers coming in to replace people who have left. And at the moment we have Andrew Ashcroft with us, who's our interim head of planning, who's standing in for Andrew while he's not around. So there are lots of new faces in planning, and what I will do is make sure that Andrew drops you an email and lets you know who all those officers are and what they're going to be doing and when they're starting, so that you've got that information. The reason that we're proposing that conservation areas moves in the growth and development scrutiny group agenda is because the new principal planning officer who will be responsible for conservation doesn't start until December. Which means that if you scrutinise it in January, I'm afraid what you're going to get is pretty much a rehash of what you've already had. And I don't think that is a very good use of your time. So what I'm proposing is that we move that forward to July, giving him 6 months to find out what's going on and make sure he can make that a decent and valuable piece of scrutiny for you. Now, what I don't want to do is have it any earlier than that, because of course we've got planning communications, and I know that you want to keep that to one item so that you can discuss it. It's a big agenda item. That's my proposal. Of course, you may disagree, but that is why perhaps cycling networks fits into the January meeting.
It's unfortunate about conservation areas because not only is that unsettling for us, but I feel that certainly among the rural parishes, there's going to be great consternation about its being moved further away. But as you say, if the new Andrew won't be up to speed, there's little point in trying to scrutinise something if we haven't got all the facts and he doesn't understand it as yet. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I obviously wasn't aware that it was proposed to move the conservation out of January because I'd originally been concerned the whole of that conservation will take up a whole meeting, and to put cycling in as well would be disaster. So whenever it comes up again, and you're suggesting July, so that's going to be in tandem then with our alternative energy policy item as well, presumably, if that's staying in the same place. Whenever the conservation does come up, I just wondered if it might be worth somehow sticking in the diary that a month or so prior to that meeting, a reminder form of, I don't know what the right briefing note or whatever, just a way of reminding members to familiarise themselves with the first conservation meeting, because I can envisage that we'd end up pretty much starting from square one again. So I don't know, I'm open to how best to do that, but I'm just flagging up some form of reminder, familiarisation, summarised briefing, whatever you want to call it, in order to get the old grey matter churning over and focusing back onto conservation, because it is an important item. And yes, I mean, the cycling, the problem happened in July was that we had those 3 very big presentations, and literally we sort of got that 5 minutes. Well, in fact, in the cycling case, I think we had 5 seconds, because by the time the 57 slides had been perused, which Yes, I wish we'd known that beforehand, because I think we could have given some training as to how to do a presentation. It was an outside, it was an external. So anyway, yes, that if maybe again with the cycling one, we just have a reminder of the salient points as to what was in the first presentation, and then we can have a more open discussion about cycling networks and et cetera, et cetera.
That seems a very good idea, a reminder, briefing or whatever we want to call it. And I've, in my tick boxes here, I've moved alternative energies into October. I know it's a year from now, but if the solar items are going to be answered, it probably gives longer for alternative energies to start to take some shape. Councillor,
We're still going to be, we'll still talk about solar farms as well, won't we? And well, if the officers don't think they'll be able to get enough information together by July, well, fair enough. But obviously, the solar farms, July's in pretty much the middle of the summer, isn't it? Well, okay, I'm open to. Depends on the officer's workload, doesn't it?
absolutely.
Depends on, how quickly you want to scrutinise something, how long you want to spend looking at a particular item in a meeting. So, for example, planning communications, we've already said we want to protect as a single item agenda and have plenty of time for discussion. There might be other items that you want to do that with. So I'm advising you don't squish too much into your agendas, because then when you've got a lot, we don't get through it and we end up bringing things back. But also my concern would be if we plan too much work in, there's not enough flexibility in your agenda moving forward. If we've already got 2 items on every agenda between now and next October, what happens next month or in December when we brought forward 3 or 4 more scrutiny matrices? How do we then decide where they go? Because everything will be delayed by 12 months if we keep popping it on the end of the agenda and with no space in the middle to get the more urgent things through.
Well, if I might, I'm still on. If I might say, that might be where we'll be looking again at an extra meeting. Because all of these items, none of them are frivolous, they're all important. And so it might be that we're having to say, well, maybe we need an extra meeting.
I think if it comes to that at the minute, you've got nothing in October. So if it is the late October, but I think the important point is that Councillor Thomas does get a very speedy response to questions raised that can be addressed by officers, and also obviously gives her a chance to feed in perhaps a bit more to what you'd like to cover in that October item, especially if there are planning applications going at the moment and there's going to be outcomes to those you'd hope before that, then there'll be some obviously lessons potentially from there from the policy that could be scrutinised in terms of that decision, or potentially what our current policies that's obviously led to those decisions being made. So you could probably argue it would actually make sense being delayed, but at the same time, some of those questions are answered in a timely manner. So not to leave everything until October for it.
Have we, just to try and recap now, so cycling January, conservation area has been forward to July. Yeah, planning communication stays where it is, and then alternative energies into October. So, right.
I'm glad you're there.
Yeah.
What would I do without you? Yes, we've already, as Charlotte's already said, the resident survey is proposed for January, together with housing delivery. That seems as though it could fit in there.
Sorry, Chairman, just a quick one for Charlotte. The survey, when did that end? 'Cause I can't remember. I know we discussed it. Was that going to end in the calendar year, or was it already ended?
The survey went out in June in Rushcliffe reports. The deadline, I believe, was either end of August, beginning of September. We're in the process of crunching the data, as they say. That will be done hopefully next week. But we've got then the opportunity to discuss that internally and make sure that what we're bringing is not just here are the figures, but this is what people are telling us, and this is what we understand that to mean, and this is what we're proposing that we do about it. So there's a little bit of lead-in time that we can get to before we come in January.
Absolutely, that's spot on. I think also as early as we can see that data, even if it's raw, not the report, I think just start understanding, because then hopefully we can feed into that process of council council in terms of what we put together to make sure that we're not obviously redoing work. And I think also considering, I know the county council just on their survey as well got results. I think to see if there are any, hopefully you suggest that the answer come back on similar lines, perhaps also seeing what they're doing as well on that side, so we're not again all just going down a separate path. That'd be interesting to see as well.
All right, and that then leaves you with waste strategy and carbon management in April, and then you've agreed sports development in July.
Yeah, I mean, we've just got to again the caveat on waste strategy, because it hopefully there, but what I've also already spoke to Darryl about is we would at least have an update then where we currently are and what we can do, because you know we can't just keep delaying. We also did have an update about 2 meetings ago, if I remember correctly anyway, so we'll have another one, but we've just got to be conscious, as I've already spoke about earlier, that we're at the behest of the government really when it has parliamentary time to go through and speak, and if it does come through, then we can. There's also going to be enough time for officers to go through it and to put the plan in place. Obviously, it's 2 weeks before that meeting. Darryl won't be very happy. We say you've got to have something sorted in a couple of days.
Where does that fit with the waste strategy at county?
Chairman, that's being discussed fairly soon. Just can't remember. It will have been discussed prior to then.
Right, that's all right. Because there will be some sort of impact in the discussions. Right, so I think that's the work programme.
Sorry, Chair, can I ask a quick question?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. So earlier today, we got the community facilities briefing. We digest that. What happens after that? We've got the briefing note. What happens after that? What's the process?
So the briefing note hopefully addresses the points that you put into the scrutiny matrix that we looked at last time round and decided that we didn't want to do scrutiny at the moment, that those questions could be better addressed through the briefing note. Whether it does or not is something you're going to have to tell us. If you feel that actually it doesn't and you still think it needs scrutiny, then we bring it back. Maybe time's different, maybe there's less pressure on work programmes, maybe there's more that needs to be fed into that. Ultimately, we just keep going back and forth until such a point that you are either satisfied with the answers that we're giving, or we get it in front of the scrutiny group.
Thank you.
I'll call you, I think I'll call you Mike. Right, what was the one I missed? The annual customer feedback report.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is the annual report, the same format as previous years. I think my overriding comment that I would like to bring to your attention is that despite the pandemic, there's been a steady level of complaints. It has not gone hugely awry in either direction, which is good. So last year saw 49 complaints overall, which is comparable with the trend that we've been seeing in recent years. 11 of those were escalated to stage 2 of our complaints process. And just to kind of summarise, 6 of those were to do with planning. And then we also had some in housing, licensing, town council governance, council tax, and the COVID relief grant scheme. So they were across the board. It's not that lots of them were all in the same area, plenty there to do. And that breakdown, apart from the COVID related one, is obviously similar to previous years. All but one of those escalations and our stage 1 complaints were all dealt with within target times, which, given the pressure on officers last year, I think is a tremendous effort. Interestingly, 7 complaints out of the 49 that we received last year related directly to the pandemic. Some of them were related to ASB up on Bridgefield shortly after the gathering restrictions were lifted. We had one related to electoral canvassing staff and whether or not that's an appropriate activity to be done in the middle of a pandemic. And one resident who was ineligible for COVID relief grant, appealing against that decision. In terms of the local government ombudsman, they received 14 complaints from residents in Rushcliffe. 6 of those were not investigated. 4 were referred back to the council for local resolution. And that's normally because we weren't given the opportunity to investigate those before people go to the LGO. 4 complaints were investigated but not upheld, and the report gives you a comparison to other local authorities, of which Rushcliffe does very favourably. In contrast to the 49 complaints, we also had 155 compliments. A lot of that is buoyed up, of course, by pandemic-related complaints, such as those for the refuse team who did a sterling job and continued picking up people's waste and such like. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of what's in the report. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Councillor?
Thank you. From 2013 onwards, I know we've got the bar chart there. If you draw a trend line or trend chart, we see it increasing slightly. Any concerns?
I think for an authority that covers as much as we do in terms of the breadth of services that we provide, 49 complaints over a whole year is very, very low. So no, I don't have any concerns.
And presumably one has to take into account the increase in the population in the borough. Therefore, that's going to bring about a slow increase.
So yeah, I'm looking at, or I was thinking of different factors: increase in population, people being able to complain as well. Might be, ways to complain, feeling more confident to reach out to the council. And when I see that kind of trend increasing, that was my only kind of question. Is there a concern? If there isn't, that's great. And you've got more knowledge, hence the question.
Like I said, I'd see all of the complaints coming in. I don't have a concern that there is a trend that would be increasing the number of complaints that we get. I appreciate there are other factors that might mean that people are feeling it's more accessible, there are more people and such like, but I don't believe that there is a larger number of problems of which people are complaining.
Thank you.
And if I might say, I think maybe people have been at home quite a lot and looking for something to do.
I think that's a very good point, actually. I think certainly me and speaking to other colleague members, the pandemic has seen, if anything, an increase in the number of caseloads. I think for that very reason, the fact that people are at home or have either working from home or sadly maybe not working, and they're filling time looking out the window and finding things to complain about. And so certainly I know, I'm sure we're all the same. We're far from, whereas a lot of the population have found themselves not working quite as hard as they may have been during the pandemic. We members have been inundated with complaints, well not complaints, but queries and caseloads. So that is a bit of a pattern, I think.
Yes, I have to agree with you. I'm getting to the point where I answer the telephone as Neville Ward Police Station. Councillor Wheeler.
I also what is when you're dealing with people, especially you're always going to get complaints. As long as we've been in customer service my entire career, I know you're always going to get that. You're going to be there. What's important is I think that we're not instantly dismissing complaints. It's easy to do so. Believe the days when I want to see someone come in and go whatever, but we're always looking and seeing, look, is there anything justifying that? We're doing our own self-critiquing of that because that's the way you improve when you get that through. But at the same time, with social media become more prevalent, it's so much easier to put complaints in. I mean, you see the comments on social media of people who literally got no idea, you have no life or no idea. A lot of people are putting comments on what you see, and you just think, what are you doing? And I think some of the comments you see on there, and I think that you're going to get some coming through in other walks of life. That's unfortunate. So more education on that matter. In terms of what I'd be interested to know is, because I know from my role at the county and the customer service team there, and the amount of work they're doing, and there's a lot of cross work. Obviously, people might bring county council and talk about the bins, for example, and a good education going there. Are we reviewing what more we can do to have that? I know we've, for example, we're referring cases back and forth, and I've seen about cases there, but again, that's gone up quite a bit as well. People are just not sure, especially new housing. We're looking at what more we can do. For example, the county council, they've got a new app called My Not Tap. We're trying to push everyone's support through there, but you could see if there's other ways of putting borough council services on there as well. Something like find out when you've been there is, what we have on our website, what we have on our own function, because I think all you're seeing there is people, if it's in one sort of hub, one place, might be easier rather than customer service people just going back and forth to each other, referring complaints and queries too. Might worth looking at if there's any way with our IT team to work together, just trying to make it easier for people as well. Because again, it's easy for us to understand because we know how the councils work. We have to send a lot of members might not, so I think we've got to bear that in mind.
I think that there's 2 points there, Councillor Reader. Ed's the person you need to speak to about customer services and how we can work better with the county council. I know that there's a lot of work going on there. I'll ask him to get in touch with you about that moving forward. In terms of complaints specifically, obviously, we don't expect members of the public to know that it's the county council that deal with potholes in the road and various other issues as opposed to us. They just want to complain to the council. What we tend to do when we get a complaint of that nature, when it's not actually one of our services, is we pass it on to the county council, the most relevant officer, so in that case it would be the highways department, also their complaints department, and we let the customer know that this is a county council issue. We don't just say, you need to tell somebody else. We've actually done that for them and created that link, so then they get a response back from the county council, which is where it needed to be in the first place. So we try to make it as seamless as we can. We don't count those complaints that we get in the figures that you're looking at here today, because it's not something that we can action. So they are put down as service requests. We pass those on to the county council to deal with.
And that's great. I think just also reflective of the workload the team have. It'd be interesting in future just to have those separate figures, say service requests, because I think it's important. You might look and go, well, why do we have 8 customer service representatives or have a number dealing with a amount of complaints? But actually, it's not just that amount of complaints, the workload they have come through. Again, I've met the customer service in the county council twice now, and meeting again next week. And the amount they get through volume, that not always complaints, or they refer on to, like to the various district councils or to town council or to other bodies, is sometimes on a daily basis. That's more of those, and there is actually county council matters to deal with. But again, it still takes up officer time. Just look at just make sure that we are supporting our team as well. They've got the right resources, which is the whole point of us reviewing those items.
Dear, thank you, Mike. Yes, that brings us to the end of the agenda, and thank you all very much for attending, and that was a very interesting session. Thank you.